We've seen a massive increase in the number of international students, and that's why we are steadying the numbers for the next 2 years so that we can make sure that international students can fully benefit from their time here in Canada.
That's the Prime Minister this past week talking about the cap his government is going to place on international study permits. It'll start in September and go for 2 years. British Columbia has the second highest number of international students in the country. The province has also voiced concern about that and about the cap, saying that there could be some negative effects. The Premier of BC, David Eby, joins me now live to discuss that. And you're just like a hallway away from me, Premier. Sorry we can't be sitting in the same room, but nice to see you here. Glad you could make the time.
Nice to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let's start with the issue of immigration and international students. You have said that there are potential negative impacts that a cap could have. After hearing the approach the federal government has decided to take, do you still have that concern, and what are those concerns?
Well, in British Columbia, we're a province that's open and welcoming, and it's always been bedrock to our province that folks from around the world are welcome to come and study and learn and even build their lives in British Columbia.
Sure.
And so the concern that we have is a couple. One is certainly on the issue of the numbers. We're in alignment with the federal government. The number of international students we've seen in British Columbia is too high. And the challenge is that we're not able to guarantee those students the kind of experience that they deserve in our province. If you're living 12 people to a house and you're being taken advantage of by an employer and in an unscrupulous school where you're not even attending, when you either go back home or decide to stay, it just isn't a positive experience. We don't want that. Right. But we also are sending a very strong message to the federal government. We need to do this together. There are key sectors where we really need folks to come in and study and learn and build their lives in BC. Healthcare, for example, skilled trades. But there's also the component of international student tuition supporting our public institutions to deliver services to domestic students. So we're engaged in those conversations with the federal government. I understand over the weekend we had some initial communications from them about what this might look like for BC, and we're going to stay closely engaged with them on it.
Have you had any indication from them about the number of permits you would get, and have you had any time to consider how you would allocate them?
Yeah, I'm told that on Saturday night, we received some numbers from the federal government. Obviously, this is early days. Staff are looking at what we've received, and there are key areas where we're aiming to set out specific exemptions to make sure that we have the healthcare workers, for example, that we need to run our hospitals so people get the care they need in British Columbia as our population grows.
You are set to announce some measures, I think this week, to target institutions that you believe are taking advantage of international students. What kinds of strategies would you look at there beyond the caps? How do you hold schools, and I use the term schools a little bit loosely here, but how would you hold these institutions accountable?
We have mechanisms in British Columbia to do two things. One is to put a hold on accrediting new institutions that don't meet our standards. And the other is for institutions that are operating, and this is particularly true for the private schools, the private institutions, if they're not meeting our standards, to strip them of credentials to be able to offer post-secondary education in BC. So it can be as significant as them losing their license.
So those are things that you are going to put on the table going forward?
Absolutely.
Can I go back to the numbers that you were given last night? I realize you may not tell me the numbers, but are you satisfied with them? Are they numbers you can operate within?
Well, so much depends, Rosemary, on whether or not there are exemptions for the key sectors where British Columbia particularly needs folks to come in and bring their skilled trades, bring their experience and their enthusiasm for these sectors. So the numbers themselves are one piece. They will apply broadly, but unless there are exemptions for these areas where we particularly need people, it's going to be a pretty major challenge. So that's what the conversation will be about with the federal government.
Some of this, as you well know, is that schools, not necessarily universities, but schools have become very reliant on high tuition fees, that they are using these fees in order to fund their institutions and the services they're providing. Is there a way that the province would consider making up the difference if you had to put a cap, if there's a cap in place and the school says, well, I don't think I can function without that money? Would you be willing to make up the difference where it makes sense?
Well, you know, for British Columbians, education is so important. Parents want their kids to have a good place to go to school. It helps build our economy. Our post-secondary institutions drive a huge amount of economic activity around research and innovation. We're really proud of our schools. We won't allow that to be compromised by this issue with the federal government. We'll address funding issues as they come up. But we do believe that as recently as 2020 and 2021, post-pandemic, we had numbers of international students that were manageable. that we were able to provide that kind of positive experience, and universities were able and colleges were able to subsidize their operating budgets and deliver high quality learning. It doesn't strike me that it should be that hard to get back to that.
Okay.
And I look forward to working with the federal government on that.
I'm going to change topics to the opioid crisis because your chief coroner is retiring, but she gave a final press conference where she released data showing that more than 2,500 people died of illicit drug deaths in 2023 alone. She repeated the calls to you to consider non-prescription safer supply. Right now it is prescription only. Do you think that that would make a difference in terms of limiting the tainted drug supply?
Well, the coroner has done amazing work in British Columbia, and it is a profoundly challenging job right now. The toxic drug crisis, the families and friends of people who have died and been affected by this, the coroner meets with them all the time. I'm very grateful for the time she spent and the recommendations she provides. With that said, there is a fundamental difference between her recommendation and what I believe British Columbia should be doing. I think it's important that when a physician or a nurse practitioner is working with someone that's struggling with addiction, that they have all the tools available to be able to support that person. I do not believe that the widespread distribution of drugs like opioids without that healthcare professional involved is the way forward. In fact, I think that's actually one of the ways that we ended up in this mess. And so making sure that those healthcare professionals are there supporting people and getting between people with addiction and predatory drug dealers, I think is so crucial and really the only way that we get to the kind of results we have had, where we're seeing that safer supply is actually saving lives in British Columbia.
But what would you say then to, Premier, to people who say, okay, you've decriminalized access to certain illegal drugs for personal use for a year now, and the number of people who are dying has gone up. How do you reconcile that this is still the best approach to the opioid crisis?
Well, I think for political reasons, some of the parties in British Columbia are seeking to make an opportunity here for themselves around what is and should be a nonpartisan issue. How do we keep people alive? What is the best way to make sure that they get the chance to get into treatment and rebuild their lives? Our province is taking a different approach from Alberta, a different approach from Washington State and from Oregon. We're looking at all these different models. What can we learn in terms of how do we keep people alive? The issue of specifically whether or not someone who has addiction issues is in possession of the drug that they're using, whether we take them to court and then try them and then release them for illegally possessing those drugs. I just don't understand how that moves anything forward. Making sure that we're intervening, providing people with an option for recovery, giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. I think that is what is going to be what gets us out of this profoundly challenging issue. And the other piece is obviously public education. The drugs are very toxic out there, and parents obviously concerned about their kids and making sure they're safe in the province.
You're here in Ottawa to attend the state funeral for Ed Broadbent. I'm going to be hosting that later. Just wondering how you're remembering him on this day as a kind of a giant of the New Democratic Party.
Yeah, as a proud New Democrat, it's a big deal, the legacy of Ed Broadbent. I remember as a very young person his leadership of the New Democratic Party. Ed was out west recently promoting his book on tour. Yeah. Had the chance to chat with him. He is a real legend. He is one of the key architects of this amazing country that we live in because of his work around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and especially Section 35, which protects Indigenous rights, which has been transformative, obviously, in how we see our country and how we operate. So, it's a sad day. We lost a giant, but at the same time, it's a memorial where we have a chance to reflect on his amazing contributions.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to that and to seeing you there later this afternoon. Premier Eby, thank you so much for coming in. Great to see you in town. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Okay.